Well, this is something that I've talked about before, and I think this is something in akin to, well, reforming our political institution and really getting proper constitutional reform through. And we have to be careful as a country that we don't allow the right wing to be the leaders on this, because if they do, the right wing, not only in this country but other countries, have shown that if they get anything like that, that they will turn the screws to their advantage. We already have a system where it takes about over 50,000 votes compared to just 32,000 votes to a Conservative for another party, even a Labour Party candidate, to get in. That is something that we should really be caring about. And if I see so many people for the past couple of years being so claiming that they're so into democracy and so against that apparently there's something gone wrong against them in the past 3 years and that it hasn't been followed, and yet when we talk about this type of stuff, actual concrete stuff, they're very reticent to actually implement it because reasons. And we've gone through these reasons before why the whole all bunk. Main one is, extremist parties will get in. Well, there are ways around that we can deal with that. Like you put a cap, they've got to at least get 5% of the vote to actually gain a seat. And then on top of that, if lower parties get more seats of them, then they get priority over them, and so on and so on. So there are ways that you can do this. And even now in our current system, you've had the ERG, and I keep on putting this to people. The people that have stopped Brexit from happening weren't Remainers or anyone else like that. It was the ERG, the hardcore Brexiteers, who pushed for the hardest possible of all Brexits that was not put to people at the referendum. And here we are now, probably about to have the most hardest of Brexits. Now, what is understandable here is that we need to get this constitutional reform through. And the worrying thing is that Nigel Farage has said that his next political project and party will be to do that. Hence why we on the left have to start now to push constitutional reform to make sure that the right don't do anything sneaky and put themselves in a position of power that is just impossible to remove them from. So this comes from politics.co.uk, and it's without a constitutional reform movement, we're done for. The political parties are in an extraordinary situation. It is akin to a state of atomy. The system in which they operated throughout most of the last century and a half has now all but broken down, and they've largely detached entities whose operational context has all but evaporated. Even the recently elected election of a Tory government with a large working majority is not what it could have been in times past. It is barely recognisable. Within weeks of the election, the Chancellor resigned. Cabinet ministers are at loggerheads with their senior civil servants, and successful ministers have been replaced by inferiors. To cap it all, a Rasputin-like figure in the form of Dominic Cummings is conducting much of Number 10's business with little reference to others. The Prime Minister himself regularly goes to ground, although the recent outbreak of the C virus, or we'll call it the T virus, because you can't say that on YouTube now, of the T virus seems to have finally forced him to become a public-facing figure again. Labour has had its own troubles in the aftermath of its worst election defeat on record. It is taking an inordinately long time to elect a new leader, and this has ensured an effective caretaker in the leader in the House of Commons. The only electoral strength Labour could muster was largely confined to Wales, where it was nevertheless somewhat weakened. The chances of it ever regaining its earlier strength seem somewhat remote, especially as it has almost vanished in Scotland and many parts of the north of England, of both of which had formed its long-held standing heartland. Now, I want to put an addendum to that point. I do not think the Tories will succeed next election. I do not think that is possible. The May elections would certainly have seen that come true. Obviously, they've been delayed now for a year. So the 2019 result was also a disaster for the Liberal Democrats. They have not retained their regional strength that they once possessed in their relatively dominant position in the southwest, and their 11 MPs are now a scattered bunch. With Brexit enacted, they can't win votes by promising to fight it, although an opportunity might present itself if the trade talks fall apart. They need to discover a charismatic leader who combines the optimism of David Steele with the political guile of Charles Kennedy. It is a tall order indeed. So in Northern Ireland, the Stormont Assembly has resumed after a closure of more than a month or two, more than 2 years, shall we say, but three new factors have emerged to complicate the picture. The DUP no longer enjoys the influence it was able to exert on the previous minority Tory government. Its electoral support has weakened, and with growing popular appeal for the Alliance Party and the Greens, the massive rise in the strength of Sinn Féin in the recent elections to the Dáil will have widespread implications for the whole of the island of Ireland, not just Ulster. The overall political picture of the parties in the British Isles then is in total disarray. This is a stark and very new, still new situation. The fact that similar things are happening in all the democracies should offer little comfort. At the moment, we're heading towards the Chinese one-party government model, where public policy is determined internally while responding to pressure from increasingly influential multinational conglomerates. But there is a solution. We should remember what happened 40 years ago when the left was still smarting from the triumph of John Major's election victory. There was a Scottish Constitutional Convention, which led successfully to the creation of the Scottish Parliament, the Welsh Assembly, and the revamped Stormont. It was a piecemeal effort, but it took place in the wake of a substantial movement for constitutional reform. Charter 88 was inspired by Stuart Weir and developed by Anthony Barnett, attached with millions of supporters, and was judged by the Daily Telegraph, doubtless reluctant, as being the most successful popular campaign of its time. Undoubtedly, it contributed to Tony Blair's massive parliamentary majority in 1997. The third major development took place in 9 Portland Street and London Soho. It was a counter-civil service. The Joseph Rowntree Reform Trust housed a political campaigns and allied think tanks there, which gave rise to the formal and informal interactions that affect a number of formal and formation of public policy. This is the kind of thing we need now, a popular movement for reform and a canny effort to influence policy and present alternatives. Otherwise, the potents are alarming. The UK is heading in the direction of becoming a Marco-type offshore island acting as a tax haven. Such a scenario must be averted. I have to say I agree on that one, definitely. And I think necessary I will look at to see if other people have been doing writings on how we could reform and what we could do as in actual policy, substantive policy, to bring in those changes.